Super. So for all of us who are joining, welcome. I think we'll get started now. Welcome to everybody to our Green Stories for Lunch session here at the International Trade Center. This time the topic is tech and sustainability. We're very excited to have as our guest today, Christian Kroll, who's the founder and CEO of Ecosia.org. So Ecosia fuses tech and nature in a really innovative way. It's a search engine that donates 80% of its profits to planting trees across the world. It's really, really different from what we've learned before. So we'll have a conversation with Christian, and then after that, we'll have a Q&A. So already, if you have questions for him, please start to leave your questions in the chat, and we'll take as many of them as we can at the end. To get us started, we first give the floor to Mr. Ashish Shah, who's the Director of the Division of Country Programs here at the International Trade Center. He's going to give us welcoming remarks. Ashish?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Susanna. Do you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay, all right. So good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by saying it's a great pleasure to be able to open this session where we will be hearing a very inspiring story of our guest, Christian Kroll, the founder and the CEO of Ecosia. Perhaps there are many of you listening in today who may not, of course, know ITC. So just to say, we are a joint development agency of the United Nations and the WTO, the World Trade Organization, dedicated to supporting SMEs in developing and transition economies to become more competitive, and as a result of that, of course, to support inclusive and sustainable growth. So, of course, sustainability has increasingly become an important topic for us, and today a significant part of our work, our initiatives, our projects, and our toolkits apply a sustainability lens. So one such initiative is the Greening Initiative led by the ITC interns. And what we do as part of this Greening Initiative, I mean, we have lots of different things, but what we are doing today, the Green Stories for Lunch, is an integral part of our Greening Initiative. And the Green Stories aims to inspire staff. And as from today, not only staff, but people beyond ITC like yourselves, to reflect on our current consumption patterns and our lifestyle choices. So today we are showcasing, as you have heard from Susanna, we are showcasing the work of Ecosia. And I just want to say that with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we all needed to very quickly adapt to our teleworking experience. And we didn't have the luxury to think about a very perfect transition from working from office to remote working. But I think we can say that, and I would not be wrong to say that through this experience, which I think has worked very well for all of us, most of us have at least 3 different conference calling software applications installed in our computers. Now that we have transitioned into this more digital working environment, the question of how we can make good digital choices, more eco-friendly digital choices, is indispensable. Ecosia is an alternative internet search engine vowing to plant a tree for every online search. It realizes this promise, as you just heard from Susanna, by donating 80% or more of its advertising revenues to reforestation projects across the world. With more than 15 million active users, Ecosia has just reached the mark of 100 million trees planted since its inception in 2009. And I want to congratulate you, Christian, and your team for this excellent achievement. We reached out to Christian because we wanted to have the perspective of a unique business on how we, as consumers, can use the internet while contributing at the same time to sustainability. I'm curious to hear your story, Christian, your views on sustainable technology, and how we as consumers can make smarter digital choices while helping you and the world to plant more trees. So back to you, Susanna, and looking forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ashish. Love that you mentioned that this whole sustainable and green initiative at ITC started with interns. So really everybody can get involved and everyone has a voice to say something. So now to Christian, welcome. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for the introduction. I think you basically almost said everything about Ecosia, so I'll try to keep it brief. So I want to start by just laying out a bit more who we are, so that you have a better idea, and then I think later on we also have time for questions. So yeah, I'm trying to keep that part brief. You've already seen on my screen basically the homepage of Ecosia, which looks more or less like this. So if you come to our website, you see a search box, and if you type in your search terms, like let's say you're in Lisbon and you're looking for a hotel, and then hit the search button, you will see a search result page. So basically, that is very similar to Google or any other search engine. You see search results, and as you can see here, also advertisements. And if you click on one of those advertisements, then Ecosia makes money. So far as everything is the same as with other search engines. However, the big difference is that we use that income, as has already been said, to plant trees. And yeah, that's basically why that's my mission, to hopefully reforest the planet. And that's also why why everybody at Ecosia is working so hard to, because we think that trees not only are very beautiful, but they're also a big contribution to solving climate change. So we're supporting projects like here in Burkina Faso, where we're basically turning completely degraded land that doesn't have much value, neither for the economy nor for biodiversity anymore. And we're transforming that back into functioning ecosystems. And that is not only great for biodiversity, but also it improves the water cycles. It gives the local people meaningful employment, and people can actually really build a future for themselves, because they can also then harvest either fruits or nuts from those trees, or generate additional incomes, any other kinds of additional incomes in the communities that they are in at the moment, so that they don't have to leave their homes and look for work somewhere else. So I really think that trees are an amazing solution to many of the problems that we have on our planet at the moment. Of course, climate change, but also other kind of injustices. And yeah, I think they're a great way to build up local economies. So that's why we're into trees. Trees are also, planting trees is very, very scalable. On this map, you see on the green areas, you see areas where trees not only can be planted, but actually should be planted to improve the productivity of the land. So there's no competition between trees and agriculture. Those two can live together very, very well. And we would need around 1 trillion trees in the next 20 years if we want to not only improve those landscapes, but also have a chance at surviving climate change. So planting trees is really one of the main pillars of, I would say, our future. And we need to do that very quickly at very large scale. A few words about Ecosia. So we are a team in Berlin. We have currently, last year we made around 20 million in revenue. We have 15 million users, and we are among the biggest websites on the planet. Actually, I think we are even the biggest website when it comes to sustainability on the planet already. And we're doing all that with a pretty small team of only 65 people, most of them based in Berlin. We had a wonderful growth last year. And the most important metric for us is not revenue. It's also not users, but it's really how many trees we've planted. And there we, as already has been said, we've recently reached 100 million trees. There's an amazing video that you can see on our YouTube channel. So I really recommend that you watch that to really understand what 100 million trees actually means. We are a typical Berlin startup, so we have ping pong table and free breakfast and all that you can imagine when you think of Berlin startups. One thing that is very different though compared to other startups, that Ecosia is not for sale. So we're a non-profit company. That means it's impossible to sell the company. It's impossible to take any profits out of the company. And it's also impossible that external organizations will ever take control of the company. So that is, we call that a purpose company. It's a trend that is evolving, especially within the social business ecosystem at the moment. But I think that's really, for me, that's a very good answer to, I'd say, many of the problems that come with hyper-capitalism and focus on profit maximization. I think that's a very healthy balance, a company that really works for its purpose. And of course, we need to make profit, but we're not profit maximizing, we're tree maximizing. That's what is a big difference compared to especially other startups also in the Berlin ecosystem. But we're not only people working in Berlin in the office, we're also those people, so the people who are planting trees. We're working with, I think, 24 of tree planting organizations across the entire planet, mostly in developing countries. And we have thousands of people who are already directly involved planting trees for us. So it's not us doing the actual tree planting, but we're basically contracting other local organizations who are doing the tree planting. And it's very important that this is based on the needs that the local communities have. So we're not just, let's say, landing there with a helicopter and defining a free area where we can plant some trees, but we're really asking the communities what it is they need. And then we're taking that into account, because many of the people's needs, be it for jobs or be it for improved water quality or just having more security in their area, most of these topics can actually be addressed by tree planting to a certain extent. So we really work together with the local communities. And yeah, I get the opportunity every once in a while to go to a tree planting project and visit. And it's really, for me, that's really what's motivating me, because I see the impact that we're having. And I also see how vast the area is that we're working on. So we've already planted or regenerated 35,000 hectares, and that is really big. I think it's, if you're thinking in soccer fields, I think that's something like, I think 5,000, I need to recalculate. I think 50,000 soccer fields, more or less. So if you want to have a understanding of the scale of that, but most importantly, this is not just one area, but those are actually tens of thousands of people who are planting trees on either their land or on their community land. And all of these people are benefiting from the work that we're doing. So this is really awesome. And I find the trips that I'm doing very, very motivating. But we're not only trying to plant trees, but we're also trying to be a role model in other areas. Here you see the solar panels that are providing the electricity for our servers. So all the searches that you're doing with Ecosia run on renewable energy. And we actually thought, why only be 100% renewable? Why not do 200% renewable? So actually we're producing more green energy that we actually need for our servers, because we believe that if leaders want to be have an impact, then it should be more than 100%, because if everybody just does 100%, then it will take a long time until we're actually completely renewable as a society. So we thought, why not step up the game a little bit? Also, you might have heard about our offer to buy the forest of Hambach. Hannah, if you're from Germany, you probably heard about that. So we tried to purchase a forest that is actually located right next to Europe's biggest coal mine, an open cast coal mine. And the forest is unfortunately, the company that's running that coal mine wanted to cut the forest down to increase its production. And we wanted, amongst many, many other organizations, we wanted to help prevent that, and actually made an offer to purchase that forest. Unfortunately, the company RWE didn't accept our offer, but the press really covered this very, very extensively. And basically that fueled the discussion if in the 21st century, if you own land that has lignite under it, but at the same time also has a precious ancient forest, if you should still be allowed to cut this down, and if a company should even have the right to own such a forest. So that really, I think, helped eventually protect the forest, because it has recently been agreed that this forest will very likely not be cut down. I mean, it hasn't been fully saved yet, but I think we're almost there. And I'm happy that we, as a startup company, that usually startups usually don't do activism or don't get too much involved in politics, but I'm happy that we can also have a contribution there and actually speak up if things aren't not right, and if we believe that things should be done differently, especially by the big corporations. Let's see. So yeah, so I'm trying to kind of spread the word and not about Ecosia, but about what we're trying to do. Basically, we're trying to solve climate change, but also try to with the ownership model that we have as a company, we also try to fix capitalism or work on a post-capitalistic world. So I have the opportunity to speak at conferences and so on, and also in sessions like this. Of course, it helps maybe Ecosia to gain a little bit of visibility, but my bigger objective is actually to have a transformation in society. I really like this this picture from Delacroix from the French Revolution, and I hope that Ecosia can be similar to that, hopefully without weapons. So I actually modified this picture a little bit, so that we really as Ecosia can be a role model and really try to lead the way to a transformation that ends up in a society that is completely sustainable. And yeah, that's what I'm dedicating my life to. And I think I'll stop it here so that we can also have some questions. I just need to find my mouse cursor so that I can actually end the presentation. But I'm handing it back to, or going back to normal screen mode.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christian. I love how you ended with that image of the peaceful revolution, peaceful and green revolution. I think that you've already started. So can we actually rewind all the way back to the beginning? How did this unusual idea of, search engines and trees come together? Like, how did you start Ecosia?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I had a picture, but I left it out because it's very embarrassing. But I think I'm gonna go back to screen sharing mode again and show it to you, because it actually shows is an answer to the question that you had. So when here you see me in Nepal, and I think that is 11 or 12 years ago. And that was actually right after I finished my university studies. So I studied business administration with a focus on finance and stock markets, because for some reason I got into stock trading when I was 16 years old, and I thought this would be my future career. But actually, during my studies, I already realized that just making money isn't really what is really motivating me. So after university, I took some time off and actually did a longer trip. I spent half a year in Nepal and then almost 1 year in South America. And during that time, I just realized that I really want to help people who don't have the same opportunities as I have. So I want to help, not only people in Nepal, but all people in developing countries, so that they really have similar opportunities as people who were as lucky as me, being born in Germany. And this second thing that I wanted to do is basically prevent the destruction of our planet. And that was something that I've observed, especially in Latin America, with huge parts of rainforest being cut down and replaced with soy plantations, for example. At the same time, I also found out about climate change, and I realized that this is the biggest threat or biggest challenge that we're facing as humanity, probably ever since the beginning of humanity. And that this, I want to contribute or increase the likelihood that we actually survive this. And so my dedication changed from making money on a stock market to actually trying to save our planet and the people on it. I realized that planting trees is a really good way of addressing those two topics, helping people, but also helping our planet. And I did that not by collecting money from, or collecting donations, but I wanted to run a business, because in the end I studied business administration. And also I was very into technology, and I realized that the business model of Google is just so powerful, and that it will be very dominating in the 21st century. So I thought a search engine that plants trees is the perfect combination of both. Maybe it doesn't make much sense when you hear like that, but for me at the time, it was kind of a good combination.
There were two of your passions. Fantastic. Then from the beginning, your mindset was kind of different, but when you built it, what do you think set your search engine apart from all the other ones out there? Because you do survive off of ad revenue, right? But the way that your company works, and maybe the way that you display certain items, these kinds of things are still different. Can you share with us?
Yes, so I think we depend on ad revenue, but as I said, the big difference is that we don't have to maximize profits. So we're already doing that we decided to exclude some of the advertisements from big oil business, for example, or just with companies that we think are malicious. We are excluding those from our advertising network. But also we just, as a company, we don't have to maximize profits, so we can for example, focus much more on privacy than other search engines are doing. So we are not tracking our users, and we're not creating a history or personalized profile of our users, and are not creating search results that are then tailored exactly to what these users think. So we're trying to avoid that search bubble, basically. And I think we could make more money if we basically tracked all that information and even sold it to others, like other search engines do, but we decided not to do so. So I think that's, in the end, that's the DNA that sets us apart from other companies. I think we're the only relevant independent search engine on the planet that is not focusing on profit maximization. And since search engines are more and more important and are already making a lot of decisions in our daily lives and will make more and more decisions for us in the future as they're slowly transitioning into becoming personal assistants for us, I think that's really important that those kind of automatic decisions are not driven by profit maximization, but really have the well-being of the individual, but also of the entire society in mind when those automatic decisions are being made.
You hit on a key point, because data privacy is such a huge issue, and to kind of take that part of the tailored, searches that keep coming up based on what you searched before, taking that away, I think frees up a lot of things. So that's a really cool thing. And now we have to ask you, like, the big question that everyone's probably wondering, right? You planted 100 million trees very recently. I think you're almost up to 101 million now. But how does planting trees by searching the internet actually work? Can you kind of take us through that process?
Yeah, so I mean, what I showed already is how you can click on advertisements and then that generates money for us. So this is basically the system behind it. But what happens then is that if we generate that money, actually, first of all, our partner Microsoft is generating the revenue for us. So they have the advertising network. And then we get most of the revenue. Ends up in our accounts, basically. And then, like a normal business, we just deduct our costs. So salaries for our employees, office, servers, and so on, and other kinds of investment that we need to make. But then basically all the profits that are left over, instead of giving those to shareholders, we're basically giving it to Mother Earth, which is our only shareholder, and using the profits for tree planting. So, and then we have a team, our tree team, basically, and we have a chief tree planting officer, which I think is an amazing job title.
Great title.
Yes. So they are basically making sure that we select the right kind of projects, and then also follow up and make sure that those trees not only get planted, but also survive, which is the more difficult part, I would say. So we use apps that the people who are planting the trees can take pictures of the trees that they've planted, but we're also using satellite images for the monitoring, or we also sometimes go to projects and visit and actually count the trees. That also happens, so that we can really ensure that the trees that have been promised are actually being planted. And actually, when we say that we've planted 100 million trees, that actually we've planted many more than that, because we're taking into account that some of those trees won't survive. And we only count trees as planted if they actually survive at least 3 years, or they will survive at least 3 years. So we're counting in a certain mortality, and that is how we're making sure that trees actually get planted. And we are also trying to raise the bar of the tree planting industry, because it used to be that nonprofits basically always just ask for money and there's not much follow-up, and then when the money is gone, they just ask for money again. But we're trying to really professionalize that, because we need a very big tree planting industry to absorb all the excess CO2 that we've emitted into the atmosphere. So this really needs to scale up massively by a factor of 1,000 probably, compared to what we have at the moment. And yeah, we want to play a role in that, especially if once bigger funds become available and we really have billions of euros for tree planting every year coming from various organizations, which I hope that this will happen at some point, then there also needs to be the capacity and organizations who can actually do that. And that's what we're trying to build up.
Great, because you are active in, 15 different countries around the world, and you're tracking these trees for at least 3 years, you said, right? So you
Yes.
have the system in place to do this.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Within this context, we want to ask you also about how COVID-19 has affected business, because you work with many organizations on the ground. How has this worked?
So I think there are different aspects. I think we as an organization dealt pretty well with it. I mean, we have, in a normal week, we have 2 remote days anyways, where people can work from home. So it wasn't such a big shift for us as an organization internally. But then we of course had, we're also embedded into the world. So we had quite a big reduction in our revenues. I think, especially because of the travel industry, which is a big advertiser for us, for example, or also other industries, basically reduced their advertising spend, and that hit us directly. So I think we had a drop of almost 40% in revenues. But we managed, because we had enough reserves built up, we managed actually that we didn't have to reduce any of the payments that we are making to our tree planting partners. So that is something that I think we can be very proud of. And some of our tree planting partners have also been affected. I mean, we're working with people from organizations from Brazil, for example, and they have the situation there is much more difficult than it is in Germany. And those will probably have to reduce their tree planting this year, but hopefully they can scale up again next year. But I think for us, it's so I hope we proved as a reliable partner in this time of crisis. And for me, it's also it shows the importance that you actually need to build up reserves, because we always thought, do we really need those reserves? What would we ever need them for? And then, well, it shows that at some point you might actually really need them. So, yeah.
Right. Cash reserves are one of the biggest needs of especially small businesses. That's what we've been finding during COVID. So great job for being prepared on that, Christian. If we broaden out a bit at this point, what's it like to compete in a market that's dominated by giants like Google? And I will say that there was some idea of collaboration, right? Like the latest version of Chrome was going to feature Ecosia as a search option. So there's some collaboration, but there's some competition. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, so I'd say competition is probably the leading theme, and then there's a little bit of collaboration. So, I mean, for us, of course, the problem is if people think of searching the internet, they think of Google, and that is problematic, because Google already, not only they are the dominant search engine in most European countries, they have way more than 90% market share. In Germany, it's almost 95%. On mobile, actually 98% or something like that. So really, they're monopolists. And not only in the search market, but they also own Chrome, they own Android, they own YouTube, they own your mail probably. So they really own a lot of access points to the web. And there they always build in Google and make it difficult for other search engines to actually also get visibility on those platforms. So on Chrome, when you install Chrome, of course, Google is your default, and there's nobody even thinks about selecting Ecosia in that moment when they install their browser. So that is tricky for us. And what Google is also doing, they're buying up whatever market share they don't have, they're buying that market share from. So in the Safari browser, for example, they're paying Apple a lot of money so that they're default there as well. So they're cementing the market position that they have and making it really, really difficult for small competitors to actually gain market share. So I wish it would be a bit easier. Google is a very smart company, but unfortunately, they're also very smart at keeping competitors away. Fortunately, a lot of regulators are looking at this at the moment, and they hopefully will ask Google to be a bit more fair when it comes to competition. But yeah, so far, so it hasn't been easy, and also Google doesn't really want to work with us. So we would like to partner with Google on search, for example, but that they're also not doing that. So yeah, I wish it was a bit easier, but we are certainly not going to give up. And if the good thing is that in the end, even though it's difficult to select a different search engine, it's still the people who can decide what search engine they want to use. And if people from the audience decide that they want to switch their search engine, it's possible. It's not easy, but it's definitely possible to do so. And hopefully we will, in the end, win people's hearts so that they start searching with us.
I feel like the tide might be turning, because all you have to do is kind of do the little add-on, and then Ecosia kind of can become your default browser. Yes. I checked it out. So this is definitely a possible thing. So you mentioned this competition or lack of competition as like a major challenge. Are there other challenges that you face just on a day-to-day basis when it comes to doing business?
Yes, so indeed there is the challenge that we don't have enough tree planting capacity. So if we keep growing more there, so if there are any entrepreneurs who want to start a business, starting a tree planting business, especially in a developing country, is I think a good idea. Not only because it's really good for the planet, but also there is need. There's need for more capacity, and we're certainly interested in partnering with good organizations who are active in that area. Other than that, we have, of course, all the challenges that all businesses have. I mean, just because we're a social business doesn't mean that everything is going perfectly smooth all the time. So the growing pains, if we increase our team, that then we need to find new structures, and finding developers in Berlin isn't easy, and all those kind of problems, we have them as well. Fortunately, I'd have to say we are in a sector where it's easy to, once you're big enough, it's easy to generate enough profit so that you can deal with all these challenges pretty easily. But yeah, I think we're like many businesses, we are also not, so it's not a journey that is just like that or exponential growth, but it's more a wave of ups and downs, and we're trying to fail our way to success, basically.
Love that. Fail your way to success and keep trying. Exactly. That's right. Then looking ahead, then what's your vision for Ecosia? I mean, you've branched out into, I saw that you have a blog, you have a merch store, your company's active on Twitter. Like, what's your vision for the company?
So yeah, I think the long term, let's say if we look 10 years ahead, what I would like to achieve, that of course we as a search engine have much more users so that we can plant hopefully billions and billions of trees. So we want to scale what we're doing. But we don't only want to plant trees, but we also want to develop our search engine in a way that it actually helps people make greener decisions or more sustainable decisions. So that, let's say, if you're looking, if you're typing into Ecosia that you want to book a flight from Berlin to Munich, for example, there are people who are still doing that, then we could tell them that they could take the train instead, and could save hundreds of kilograms of CO2 if they would do that. So those kind of little recommendations, and just providing the transparency so that people can make more sustainable choices. I think that is really the technology that we want to invest in. And this is quite challenging for such a small team, because you really need to understand, like your algorithms really need to understand a lot of things, but we hope that we can really invest further into that. And then last but not least, we want to be part of that transformation of society. So really help especially also bigger organizations to speed up their efforts on becoming not only carbon neutral, but potentially even climate positive, and really help that, I think, especially by being a role model, showing that things, a different way of doing business is possible, that especially inspiring young entrepreneurs to put people and the planet before profit. So we want to be a role model for that, and hope that many other organizations try to do similar things or even better things. So that's our goal.
That's great. That's like a song to all of us at the International Trade Center. People and planet before profit. That's great. Then the last of our planned questions for you, you touched upon it already, Christian, in using tech for sustainability. But how can we make better choices when it comes to selecting like platforms or software to use, given that our digital carbon footprint isn't as easy to see as, let's say like water bottles, which people can see and understand? How can we bring more awareness about this kind of thing?
Yes, I think honestly, even if I wasn't the CEO of Ecosia, I would say using Ecosia is one of the most impactful things that you can do to not only reduce your online carbon footprint, but really make it a positive one. We estimated that one search with Ecosia actually absorbs around 1 kilogram of CO2 emissions because of the trees that we're planting. And I'm doing dozens of searches every day, which means that there would be thousands of searches every year. So you quickly end up at various tons of CO2 being absorbed from the atmosphere because of your searches. So, and that is the average CO2 footprint in Germany is around 10 tons. So it's a significant part of your overall CO2 emissions that you're then reducing because of just because you're using a different search engine. So it's really one of the main things that you can do. Other than that, I mean, yes, the internet has a negative footprint, and I'd say especially when it comes to doing things like watching video, you don't always have to watch video in 4K. HD might be enough because that really brings down the footprint of the video that you're watching quite a bit. But I think we have to be mindful of the negative effects of the internet when it comes to climate, but also the internet has a lot of positive effects. So if let's say I want to look up some information and I do that on Wikipedia instead of going by car to the library, then I'm also saving CO2 emissions. And I think overall, the internet has a positive effect on the climate. We just have to I think all of the companies should aspire to be at least 100% CO2 neutral, if not 200% like we are. So I think there's no limit how far you can go. You can, of course, have a positive impact on the climate as well, not a negative one. So I think, I hope that we can raise the bar and then all the other internet companies will follow, because I think the internet is attracting a lot of young people who are very passionate about climate change. And I think companies shouldn't stop at just being good enough. They should really aim for much, much more. And then hopefully the internet can become not only not a negative force in the internet, but ideally even a positive one.
Exactly. I love what you said about like raising the standard to not just offset some of the carbon footprint, but to actually be good for the environment.
Yes.
And that's kind of a perfect plug for Ecosia, because if you do searches, then you're actually helping.
Yeah, I think this idea of being CO2 neutral is for me, that's 20th century thinking. We have to think about how can we be positive. And we're working very closely with Microsoft, which is one of our, it's our biggest partner. And we are also one of Microsoft's biggest partners in search in Europe. And they recently announced that they want to become carbon neutral by 2030. So that means that in that year, they would be emission neutral. But then by 2050, they also want to absorb all the emissions that they have produced since the beginning of the company. And that is, for me, that's the right kind of ambition. That's how companies should be thinking. Like, not only how can we be carbon neutral this year, but really how can we, especially if it's a company that exists already for a while, how can we repair some of the damage that we've done? And while we're on it, why not also really do some good for the planet? And I think I hope that this is the direction that businesses will take in the 21st century.
That's great. On that high note, we're going to soon head into our Q&A. But first, we actually like to interact a little bit more with our viewers, and then we'll go into the Q&A with questions from our chat. So we're going to do a few poll questions. For context, our innovation lab here at the International Trade Center organized this session, so shout out to all our colleagues there. And one of the 4 challenges the team is tackling this year is greening ITC. So we wanted to get a sense of how all of you, our viewers, might be greening at your workplaces. And at the end, when we have all the results, we'll share this on Twitter, and we'll also embed what we find into this greening ITC challenge. So we're going to launch, I think, 3 questions at this point. So please take a minute to read and answer. These are all kind of related to your experiences. Question is, what is or are the main reasons for you personally to keep consuming single-use plastic? I think you'll see all 3 of them on the polls. We'll give you a few minutes to answer all 3, and then you can submit. Okay, maybe another minute for everyone to submit. Great, so now we're going to actually look at the questions from the chat to ask Christian, if everyone is okay with the polls. We have a lot, we'll see how many we can get to Christian. First question is, what organizations, when you mentioned that 80% of your profits go to plant trees, what organizations do you work with?
It's really, I mean, you can look at them on our website, and I really recommend watching some of the videos so that you can see what kind of tree planting work we're doing, because that's really different in depending on the area and the context that we're working in. There's one project, for example, where we're working with a radio station. That is an experiment where we're working with a radio station so that they promote over farm radio and tell the farmers that trees are actually good on the land and they don't have to cut it down. Other projects are more traditional, where we have a nursery basically and really kind of have seedlings that we're then bringing to the land and planting it there. Or in Burkina Faso, for example, we're actually, water retention is more important in the Sahel zone, where we're actually digging holes into the ground so that when it rains, the water gets collected, and then just throw a few seeds in there so that the trees then grow almost automatically. So it really, the context is always very, very different. And in addition to that, you also need to understand what the people actually need. So it can be quite complex, but the answers I think are always very creative and are usually very, very good. And you can probably watch some of those in our videos. And the organizations that we're working with are usually small organizations who are from the regions that we're working in. So we have, I think, a few contracts also with bigger organizations, from one from Germany, for example, and there are a few European organizations, US organizations, but I'd say the majority is actually local organizations that are run by people who are working in the countries and understand the cultural context. I think that is usually the reason why planting projects fail, that people come with ideas, let's say Western ideas, that just don't apply in the local context.
You have to respond to the actual needs. Perfect. Second question, it's quite interesting. Will you always plant trees, or are you researching alternatives, like tree alternatives that might be even more effective than what you're already doing?
So yeah, we are of course looking, I mean, the reason why we're planting trees is because we think it has the biggest impact, probably, or at least one of the biggest impacts. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with Project Drawdown, which is basically looking at climate solutions and are ranking them. And it's not always about trees, but most of the solutions that we have are actually about land use, and mostly also how we produce food. And their trees are also very connected to that. So we're looking at this area as a whole, where we're also trying to understand how agriculture relates to tree planting and how we can include trees into agriculture, because this combination is very important. And most of our projects, we say that we plant trees, but actually we're doing a lot more. Most of our projects also have other elements included into that, like efficient cook stoves, for example, or I mean, also just ways how people can actually generate money from tree planting, or how we can do help education in those areas. So it's actually, we're trying to touch a lot of topics, and trees are only our main KPI, but we try to solve a lot of problems. Water scarcity is a big thing. Of course, also access to food is a big topic, and we're trying to address all those with our tree planting. And that's the beauty of tree planting, that you can actually touch all those important topics.
Right, when you say access to food, someone was asking about, do you consider planting fruit trees? Like, how do you decide what kind of trees? You know, how do you manage that long term?
Yes, that is, I mean, fruit and nut trees, or just any kind of trees that provide some kind of income or food, that's super important, because if a tree provides you with an income or a food supply, then you won't cut it down. So that is definitely super important for us. And what we try to do is to mostly plant native species, but then also combine that sometimes with species that are maybe not native, but can help people really sell food on the market, for example. That's a very important element.
Great. We have one participant who's saying that they've been actually experimented with different types of search engines other than Google, but sometimes, and not Ecosia yet, that's the important point, because they're saying that these other platforms have not been as good in their performance. So how do you actually make up for that? Because you have to incentivize people to use the platform.
Yes, I mean, our main incentive is that we're planting trees if you're using us. Then also the privacy thing, I mean, it's not something that is visible every day, but for me personally, that's very important. I think, I don't want to be tracked with everything that I'm doing, and I don't want to have one company control all the data that I'm generating. Yeah. Then, I mean, if you're not happy with the search results, Google is always just one click away. You can basically, on the Ecosia page, you can already kind of redirect your search to Google. So you don't have to use Ecosia all the time. I think it's enough if you use it most of your time as your default. And then I sometimes realize that Ecosia is even providing better results. So different doesn't always mean worse. But I'm also sometimes using Google. So we don't, other than other search engines, we don't want to be a monopolist.
Competition is healthy.
Yes.
Then can you comment on the algorithm for Ecosia and Google? Someone's asking about that.
Yes, so our main algorithm is based on Bing, which is Microsoft. So that is basically the core technology behind Ecosia, and then we're enriching that with own features. Let me give an example. If you're looking for the weather in Geneva, for example, then Microsoft, if we would send that query to Microsoft, they would only give us 10 links, but you don't want to have links in that context. You want to have know what the weather actually is. So we're building a little weather widget, or we have built a little weather widget that actually shows you what the weather is at the moment. So those kind of things we're adding, and we're also adding other, let's say, more sustainable features, like we're highlighting a few websites that we think are more sustainable than others. If you're looking for clothing, for example, then we would highlight B Corps like Patagonia in the search results, so that you can select a more sustainable company over another one. So those are the kind of technical investments that we're trying to do. And also, I mean, we are one of the biggest websites on the planet, and we have a very small team to handle that, and just maintaining all the apps and extensions and of course the website. That is already quite a big challenge. I'm always surprised how we actually manage that with such a small team. There are companies who have only a fraction of our traffic, but 10 times the amount of people working on it. So yeah, we're trying to keep up, basically.
Green and lean. You mentioned young entrepreneurs a lot, and we have a student here from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill who's saying that Ecosia is very popular among her friends and the age group in general. So how can we actually reach some of the older generations to choose Ecosia?
So what I've heard a lot is that if older people talk to me about Ecosia, what I often hear is that their children have kind of set it as the default on their computers or on their phone. And they, I mean, since then they're using it. So I think especially younger people can really have an influence there. Also what young people can do, especially if you're part of an organization like a university or even just, I mean, a company, or I mean, I think everybody of us is in some way involved in an organization. You can ask the admin of your organization to just change the default to Ecosia. And if people then really want to switch back to Google, they can still do that, but at least the default is then the better option, in my opinion. And that is something that I think everybody of us can do. And it's actually the impact that you as an individual can have by doing something like that is really big. And especially for universities, we have a program that's called Ecosia on Campus. And there we have, I think, dozens of universities, big universities, who've already switched to Ecosia. So if that person who asked wants to be part of that, I can only encourage that.
Super, that's a very concrete takeaway for that. Someone else is asking, is there a way to provide Ecosia with feedback on how good search results are?
I think, yes, there's a feedback button for some of the features that we're developing. I think there are quite a few searches where we're not involved, but we're just providing whatever Microsoft is showing us, there we potentially can't do so much about it. But I think there's always on the website there's a feedback button somewhere.
Okay, like maybe a contact us button or something like that.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Someone is asking, where do you get trees? And who takes care of them? I think you answered this one, but where do you get the trees?
Yeah, I mean, it's our partners that are helping us to plant them. Usually what they're doing is they collect seeds in their communities. Their community members are even paid for collecting the seeds, because you want to have native species that are adapted to the local climate, and then you just put them into little earth bags, and then they sprout at some point and are already adapted to the local climate. So we're not purchasing them somewhere else, but always produce them locally.
Local is best. Someone wants to go back to the very first question we asked you, when we did ask you about how you came up with the idea to combine search engines and trees. But what was the very moment, like the first time that this idea entered your mind? Do you remember?
I think that was when I was living in Buenos Aires. And actually, during my time in Nepal, I already did a little project where I wanted to start a search engine that was built by Nepalese people and was actually using all the profits to support projects in Nepal. And that didn't work very well. That wasn't a very good idea, because the internet in Nepal at that time wasn't very developed. And also I didn't really know how to build something like that up. But for me, basically, after traveling in Latin America for a while, there was just this moment when I realized I have to do something against this destruction of our planet, and I have to do something about climate change. And then I still had the code for my search engine basically in my backpack, literally. And I realized that this is what I should do. And then I just started building it in my apartment in Buenos Aires.
Every great startup story starts like this, right? In my apartment or in my garage, you know. That's great.
It was actually only a room. I didn't have my own apartment. I was living with other people.
Okay. One person is touching on what you said about making a change. You can talk to the organization to see if Ecosia can be the default browser. One person has already works at UNICEF and has already promoted Ecosia to staff internally, but it just gets lost. Do you have any suggestions on how to actually see this through to the end?
Yeah, I think if you calculate the impact that an organization like UNICEF could have with thousands of people, I mean, if you multiply that by, let's say, just 1 or 2 tons of CO2 per year, it's really massive, and that maybe gives it a bit more weight. Also, I mean, what I described earlier, the injustice that is created if everybody just selects Google as default all the time, it's really dangerous for society and people, because they're often, I don't know, there's a certain hesitance to change away from the default, but if everybody just uses the default all the time, then we end up with a monopoly. And I think that is, that's not good for society. So maybe even make that a little bit of a political question. Like if solving climate change is important to your organization and just openness, transparency, and fair competition is important to your organization, then you should use us as a search engine or somebody else, but maybe not the monopolist.
Mm-hmm. So there's the question and the answer for our UNICEF colleague. One question about the field. Do you have a structured program to train young people on agroforestry or tree planting?
We don't have that yet. I think some of the organizations that we're working with offer that, but we actually thought about even having some kind of a startup competition for potential tree planters, but there are a lot of good permaculture or agroecology courses out there so that people can take, or books out there. I think, well, hopefully we can do something like this in the future, but I think that the main challenge is actually, how do you build up an organization that actually works and that can plant trees and that can manage all the people? And this is a challenge that I think there are really no good courses out there where you can learn this. I would probably recommend that you do an internship at one of our tree planting partners who are doing this pretty well. So if you want to get into that field, then I think approaching one of our tree planting partners would be the best first step.
And they can find that information on your website?
Yes, that's on our website. We publish all our tree planting partners there.
Great. Someone's saying that Ecosia provides more results and wider results than Google when they type in a keyword. So how do you guarantee the quality in the search results? I think you kind of touched upon this already, but they're wondering about this.
Yes, I mean, to a large extent, it's not us, but Bing doing that, the
Right.
algorithm. But as I said, we're filtering out a few ones, highlighting others. So we're trying to do our best to make it a more sustainable experience. But then also with the limitations of a very small team. We're 65 people. I think Google's more, they have more than 100,000 people. So there's a little bit of an imbalance when it comes to resources.
Just a little bit. And I think this is the last question, unless we have any other ones that come in, but have you heard about the Great Green Wall in Africa?
Yes.
And are you in any way involved in this?
I've definitely heard about it. We've also, I think, we've been in touch, and I think some of our tree planting projects are even counted into that kind of, I don't know what it is, project, or it's not a project, it's more, I think, more a communication initiative, probably.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been to some of these areas, and to be honest, I haven't seen a great green wall there yet. And I think also the concept of having one wall that's not really working. What you actually want is a great green mosaic of landscape restoration. And especially you also want to avoid that people destroy ecosystems that are currently still functioning and are turning it into deserts. So I think the approach needs to be, definitely can't just be a stripe or a little wall across Africa, but it actually entire countries need to really rethink how they work with the land, and they need to start repairing the land that has been damaged instead of continuing the damaging. And that is, that I think is a very, very big challenge, and many initiatives can potentially feed into that.
I like what you said, not a wall, but a mosaic. So everywhere, yes. Cover the whole, yes. The whole continent. Great. So thank you so much, Christian. That was kind of like the quick fire question answer round. We do have results from the polls. So we're going to share that now for those of you who are curious. So to run through them, when we said, what's the main reason that you keep consuming single-use plastic in the workplace? The top answer was lack of alternatives. Okay. Number 2, what areas of your workplace would be the most effective to start eliminating plastic use on a wider scale? Number 1 is cafeteria. Got it? Like, for takeaway meals and utensils and things like that. And number 3, what resource would be the most adequate to fight the use of single-use plastic in your organization? Top answer by far was changing or renegotiating procurement guidelines. So again, it's about the source, which I think, Christian, you've been talking about as well. Like the first browser you look at, that matters. It's like the kind of contents that you get, that kind of stuff matters. Yeah. Any last words that you want to say, Christian, before we wrap it up?
No, I just also want to say I participated in the poll because it also showed up on my screen, so I might have messed up your results. I'm not sure, but I think it's a very good example how if somebody just takes the first step and actually changes the way things are done. I mean, at the Ecosia office, there is no single-use plastic, so people can't even get into a situation where they would use something. So I think we all need to be a bit bold and actually take the first steps and not wait until somebody resolves these problems for us. And that's the same with search engines. So if somebody takes the initiative and actually changes the default search engine in an organization, then most people will actually start using it. So it's those kind of initiatives that are needed. And I really applaud all the people who are taking those initiatives.
Fantastic.
You, for example, and the entire team that has proposed this session.
Well, we're super happy to have you join us, making time to talk to us about this. And I think that's kind of lighting a fire, like a good fire, right? A green fire under all of us to see what we can do at our organizations. So thank you so much again, Christian, for joining us today. We know you're busy. We really appreciated your time here. And to all of our participants too, for all the great questions. And of course, a special shout out to our Innovation Lab for organizing all of this. If you want to see more updates about all of our work here at the International Trade Center, follow us on Twitter at ITC News and at innovation_ITC for the latest. We'll also give more information about this greening challenge that we're working on. And this is also being streamed live on Facebook right now. So thank you to everybody. Yes, if you look in the chat, you'll see the two Twitter handles that you can follow. So thank you again for everyone joining us. Thank you, Christian.